that if the election turned out to be between Hillary Clinton and Mike Huckabee, he would have to vote for Huckabee. Well, that was Bill. Yet his most distinguishing characteristic, and this really showed up in the books he wrote with Neil, was repeated flashes of astonishing insight, the kind of insight that enabled them to uncover the 80-year pattern in American history that is now once again coming to a climax. He and Neil were amateur historians in the literal sense. They did what they did out of love. But perhaps because they were amateurs, they had the courage, some might say the audacity, to believe that they could rewrite American history based on what was really a fairly quick survey of biographical and other secondary literature. They made that work by seeing into the heart of things. Their work is so unique that I still wonder how widely it will ever become known. I am very proud to be one of only 2 professional historians who have seriously engaged it in print, and it has made my own books better. But like many other great writers of the past, they will always be there for those curious enough to find them. One of the great gifts which Bill and Neil gave to those of us who have read those books is the ability to identify ourselves in members of parallel generations from the past. That also, as I've discovered, makes their ideas a marvelous teaching tool, and starting in 2 weeks, a group of my students at the Naval War College will be learning about their ideas in a course called Generations in Film for the 10th year in a row. To illustrate that point, and to conclude this talk, I'm going to use the words of a fellow prophet from an earlier generation, from the missionary generation, the great historian, journalist, and civil rights activist, W.E.B. Du Bois. He and Bill actually have quite a bit in common. Du Bois was born in 1868, putting his life in exactly the same relation to the Civil War as Bill's was to the Second World War. Du Bois also earned undergraduate and graduate degrees at Harvard, and he too lived a life of varied pursuits and was, among other things, a great historian. Du Bois was lucky. He remained alert and active well into his 90s, and he died in August of 1963 at the age of 95, astonishingly, literally on the very eve of the Great March on Washington, an event which, I am very proud to note, was attended, along with tens of thousands of others, by 2 16-year-olds named David Kaiser and Bill Strauss. Du Bois spoke the words I am about to read at a celebration of his 70th birthday in 1938, by another coincidence, exactly 70 years ago. As you hear them, I don't think you will have any trouble understanding why I decided they would be fitting words to end my commemoration of the sadly shorter life of my dear friend and his fellow prophet, Bill Strauss. Here's what he said. I have been favored among the majority of men in never being compelled to earn my bread and butter by doing work that was uninteresting, or which I did not enjoy, or of the sort in which I did not find my greatest life interest. This rendered me so content in my vocation that I seldom thought about salary or haggled over it. I insist that regardless of income, work worthwhile which one wants to do as compared with highly paid drudgery is exactly the difference between heaven and hell. I am especially glad of the divine gift of laughter. It has made the world human and lovable, despite all its pain and wrong. I am glad that the partial Puritanism of my upbringing has never made me afraid of life. I have lived completely, testing every normal appetite, feasting on sunset, sea, and hill, and enjoying wine, women, and song. I have seen the face of beauty from the Grand Canyon to the Great Wall of China, from the Alps to Lake Baikal, from the African bush to the Venus of Milo. Perhaps above all, I am proud of a straightforward clearness of reason, in part a gift of the gods, but also, to no little degree, due to scientific training and inner discipline. By means of this, I have met life face to face, I have loved a fight, and I have realized that love is God and work is his prophet, that his ministers are age and death. This makes it the more incomprehensible for me to see persons quite panic-stricken at the approach of their 30th birthday and prepared for dissolution at 40. Few of my friends have openly celebrated their 50th birthdays, and near none their 60th. Of course, one sees some reasons. The disappointment at meager accomplishment, which all of us to some extent share, the haunting shadow of possible decline, the fear of death. I have been fortunate in having health and wise in keeping it. I have never shared what seems to me the essentially childish desire to live forever. Life has its pain and evil, its bitter disappointments, but I like a good novel, and in healthful length of days, there is infinite joy in seeing the world, the most interesting of continued stories, unfold, even though one misses the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I understand now we have some videotape about generations.
Whenever I speak before school counselors, I feel very conflicted because I realize if I give a good speech, you're going to take lots of notes, you're going to go back and make a positive difference in a lot of young people's lives. But if I really mess up and do a terrible job up here, you're all going to want to give me a great big hug. So I'm a little conflicted. Actually, the teenagers of today need their hugs too, as teenagers did when we were that age as well. And as I was flying here, I saw a USA Today that had a letter to the editor from a teenager who was responding to a recent story about high-tech messaging and how teenagers were not developing personal skills and how they're doing all sorts of nasty things online and so on. And she was saying, wait a minute, we really are doing a good job at most things, and we're going to fix the world in ways that you don't understand. So please lay off us a little bit and have a little more confidence in us. And that's one of the messages that I'm going to try to impart today. It's an important message for everybody involved in K-12 education, and frankly with college too, that things are generally going better than most people in America realize. This is the full list of the American generations. The first book that Neil Howe and I wrote together is called Generations. It's a story of the full American history as a series of collective biographies. And now you notice the colors here, they show a certain pattern. There is a location in history that these different colors share. It gives them what Neil and I call archetypes. A yellow one is an artist archetype. They are the ones who see the great crises as children and pre-soldier age teens. They see World War II or the Civil War or the American Revolution through a child's eye. Then you have the green color prophet archetype. These are the boomer-like generations that are the post-war babies, the ones who know war only through what their parents tell them. They didn't see it personally, and they come of age launching what historians call spiritual awakenings, great changes in culture, family, and society. And then you have the red-shaded nomad archetypes. These are the children of the awakenings. They are the ones who witness these upheavals in morals and values in families, like the consciousness revolution of the 60s and 70s, but we've had many of those in our history, and they're always, interestingly, about halfway in between the great wars. And then you have the hero archetype, the blue-shaded generations that are born immediately after these episodes of substantial family cultural values change, the post-awakening, or in the case of millennials, the post-consciousness revolution generations. This also shows that we share our generational neighbors over time. That makes this different from a race or religion or other social characteristics. That Gen Xers are going to be scrunched between boomers and millennials forever, so get over it. Today's young people probably don't write quite as well as today's 63-year-olds by the standards of the 20th century. But if you measure them by the standards of the 21st, today's young people are far in advance of today's older Americans. What century are we in? The 21st. They win. Now I want to close with a comment that Franklin Roosevelt made to the generation today's young people most resemble. That GI generation, the boomers' older parents, the ones who Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. Well, they were great at some things, not great at others, like any generation. But back in 1936, Roosevelt said to them in his renomination address, he said, "There is a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given." I think he meant his own generation, the post-Civil War babies who actually had a fairly good glide through history, suffered in war less than any other generation in the entire history of the New World, and generally had a pretty good time in their life. Of other generations, he said, much is expected, and he meant the young people. Today's millennials are looking for someone to expect a lot of them also. And then he said, this generation has a rendezvous with destiny. They did. A few years later, they heard the trumpet call. They marched off. They fought with valor and with intelligence, with weapons and with science, to defeat an enemy of our civilization in a war that had to be won. And we honor them for that. We are grateful to them for that. We owe our blessings to that. The millennials have a rendezvous with destiny. We want them to have the toughness, the intelligence, the courage, the heroism to make it through. And those of us in the older generations, we want to think of them as our legacy, and we want to see this be part of an onward march of civilization. And the most important thing we can do right now is to educate them well. And that's what you're doing. And I thank you for that.
Bill was particularly taken with the show Children of Eden, and especially the song Ain't It Good, as sung for you now by Nellie Darling, a 2007 graduate of Thomas S. Wooten High School.